Hello and welcome everybody to the Mary Trump Show. And today my guest is Tim Miller, an MSNBC analyst, writer at large at the Bulwark, host of Not My Party on Snapchat, and as of yesterday, author of the new book, Why We Did It. Tim, it's so good to meet you. I kind of can't believe we haven't met yet. How are you?
Mary, I can't either. You know, they say that we have this never Trump cabal, that we're all meeting at various cocktail parties. I guess I'm not getting invited to them. I don't know how we haven't met, but I would think that we are both pretty high in the cabal were it to exist. So I'm so excited to finally do this.
Me too. And I, particularly after the Supreme Court basically taking a hatchet to American democracy and what's been going on in the hearings, the January 6th Select Committee hearings, as well as your former party's reactions, lack thereof, and trying to position themselves as separate from everything the committee is uncovering. First of all, I'm really curious. I wish I had had time to read your book, but again, it just came out yesterday. So I usually try to be prepared, but I'm very much looking forward to it because I'm always really curious about that evolution, that political evolution. Because, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful at all. It's just
please.
that, I've been a liberal all my life, and some people may not understand why. So I've never quite understood why people were Republicans in the first place. So
yeah, sure.
I'd love to hear a little bit about that journey, and which your book is about, and what happened. What was the turning point? Was it this sudden thing, or was it this slow building wave of horror?
Well, look, everybody, and I say this to all my former friends and colleagues who haven't jumped ship. I always say, look, everybody who gets into politics in the beginning, there's like a level of earnestness, right? Or you care about politics. You're drawn to it for a reason. Very few people just kind of accidentally fall into politics, right? And so, as a young person, I tended to be conservative, and I was more of a moderate Republican. I was always a moderate Republican. I worked for John Huntsman. Like, that was my type of Republican. My colleagues on campaigns used to joke back in the aughts that I was a Lincoln Chafee Republican. It's like it was barely a Republican at all. So I was always a moderate, right? But I bought into the personal liberty side of things. I bought into the free market side of things. And everybody's influenced by their family. We can get into that with you in a second. But my father was a self-made man, and I kind of really I think that impacted my view of how the government should be involved in taking from his success. And foreign policy wise, I found myself more on the pro-America neocon, if you will, side of things. I ended up having some doubts about Iraq, and so that's why I was drawn to the party. But like I said, I was a moderate. I think that what I get into in the book is the shameful part of all this. That covers most of my peers, right? Like, most of my peers who got into politics came up in the West Wing era. We were all kind of center-right, moderate Republicans who were drawn to the drama, drawn to the game, drawn to the sport of it. I didn't know a ton of people who were, hardline social conservatives or hardline anti-immigrant nationalists. Many of us liked Obama kind of at a personal level. And, had we been born 4 years later, might have worked for Obama instead. You know what I mean? Like that, this is where we were. Like we were, wearing one jersey. The other people in town were in the other jersey. My friends were Democrats. We'd attack each other on Twitter. Liz Smith, who's Pete Buttigieg's person. Like, we used to have kind of a performative fight back and forth because, like, the differences with us are pretty small. Like, we had differences, but they're pretty small. And so I look back on that, and Palin was the first, and so I talk about this in the book, and I think this is in some ways, the book is actually harder on people like me than it is the actual bigots and true believers, because it's like, look, we just excused it. We compartmentalized it. We're like, the candidates that we are working for are the good ones. The Sarah Palin thing. Like, I saw all this happening back in 2008. I saw it, and I knew it was coming. And I just because I was so enamored with the horse race and the sport of it, I put it in a box in my brain. And so, I mean, this is, a pox on my house, but that's kind of how it happened.
That's one of the interesting points here, is how all of us do this. If we're wrong, we don't like to admit it. So we just would rather keep being wrong and not listen to information that contradicts us. If we're part of something and then sort of around the edges, bad stuff starts happening, we put on our blinders. Everybody does that. And especially since political parties are inherited in the same way religions are, in a way. There was a study done that showed that you're more likely to get divorced than you are to change your political party. So it's deeply ingrained
and deeply. And just 2 quick points on that. And the central, like, if my book is about anything, besides politics, it's about these stories that we tell ourselves to comfort us, to avoid us from having to confront unappealing facts, right? Like, that's what it's about. It's about how we lie to ourselves, and we do the convenient thing, rather than saying, oh man, like, I actually need to do the hard thing here. Like, the hard thing here would be to say, no, this is against my integrity, or no, I need to kind of, what the things that are going on in my social group is not, is unethical or immoral. Those things are. It's much easier to tell it to, the old George Bush line. So, about Bush, this was a good line. Was, we judge ourselves by our best intentions and our enemies by our worst examples. And, like, that's kind of what this book is about, right? Like, you just look at yourself and you don't actually judge, the reality. And so, I think that's one element of it. And the other thing is, as a gay man, I wrote a lot about identity and coming out of the closet. And a lot of this for me, leaving the party, there were some parallels between coming out of the closet, right? Like, you have this identity of yourself. Then this goes to your point about divorce and how rare it is. I'm a Republican. This is particularly true in DC. It's true throughout the country, but, like, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat, and that defines me. And it's as much a part of me, I think, particularly for white people, not for people of color, but for white people, right. It's like, it's as much a part of me as my race and my religion. Like, I'm a white Catholic, Republican Denver Broncos fan. Like, those are the things that define me, right? And so if I change that, then the people in my life start to look at me differently, right? They're like, so it becomes hard. It's like, oh man, if I come out of the closet as a Hillary voter, what's my dad going to think? What's my grandma going to think? What are my friends going to think? My LinkedIn bio says Reagan on it. I'm going to have to change that, right? Like, it's harder than people think. It shouldn't have been hard because, it was so monstrous what happened in 2016. But I think that people don't appreciate, particularly non-political people, like, don't appreciate how ingrained that is in our culture in Washington and with highly engaged political people. And I think that is one of the reasons why so many of my friends kept going along with this.
You make a really good point about the different kinds of Republicans there used to be. There was I think a lot of the people, you're much younger than I am, but a lot of people in the 80s, 90s, who were Republicans would be Democrats now, probably.
Right.
Obama probably would have been a Republican in the early 80s, because I think a lot of
older Obama, certainly.
Yeah, exactly. So that's not the case. I think the Republican Party is now a monolith. What do you think? Because this is what I find very curious. A lot of people in your position decided to stay, dig in, and go to the dark side. You reference Elise Stefanik, and she's one of many. Like, what about this made some people want to stay? Because, as you said, it was so horrifically bad in 2016 that it gave you guys an out to make it. It was the reasonable thing to do was to leave the party.
Right.
And yet a lot of people stayed.
Almost everybody stayed. And I could put on in DC, obviously there were a lot of people around the country who bailed, but I could count on 2 hands, like, the people that really, did the right thing. Elise is I think a particular example. I think it's a little bit different for different people. There are a couple different types that I talk about, and one of them is just straight ambition, right, and career ambition. I don't think that people who have come to politics more recently who aren't like huge political nerds might not realize Elisa's campaign in 2014. She ran, like what the dream campaign would have been for me, for a candidate. It was like, I'm pro-immigrant, I'm pro-gay, I believe climate change is a problem and we need to deal with it, but I also, support a more aggressive foreign policy, right? That was what we need to be compassionate and welcoming. That was her campaign. She was on the front edge of that in 2014. I know. And so I interviewed for this book. I tried to interview her. She sent me an email that said, I see your Twitter feed. So I don't think I don't want to do this. So I was like, okay, fair enough, Elise.
All right.
But I interviewed all the people that were on the campaign with her friends. We have a ton of mutual friends. We worked together in 2012. And, they all make excuses for it and say, well, this is what our voters want. It's like, well, that's not really true, actually. There have been other that she could, have maintained, I think, kept winning primaries up there, but just not been as powerful, right? And so this was not for her a response to voters. That is the case for certain candidates. For her, she's so ambitious that she, managed to just put all of those past views aside and say, I'm going to take out Liz Cheney. I'm going to be the Speaker of the House. And I think that Elise Stefanik will be on the short list for the VP, especially if it's Trump next time, maybe if it's DeSantis. And so it's paid off for her. And so I think that is another reason why you keep doing it, right? Like why you stay in, there's a little bit of a mob element to it, right? You can't, you keep getting rewarded. So, I think she's a really extreme example. There are a lot of other people that it's more mild, right? It's just inertia, right? And it's like, this is my career. I'm doing this. What else am I supposed to do? And they'd call me and we'd have a drink and I'd make suggestions to them. And, they'd say, I don't know. And then mumble something and then keep going the next day. So, I think that there are different reasons and people have different addictions, but they're so powerful. These rationalizations are so powerful. And that's, I think, was the big surprising thing for me. I would have expected more people to bail.
The thing that surprises me is that, and this is my prejudice, but
sure,
I don't think you can be a decent human being and be an elected official in the Republican Party anymore. And it strikes me that, okay, in the Senate, almost 100% of the time, it's 50 votes. It's a 50 vote block. In the House, a tiny handful of Republicans will vote with Democrats. So it is almost the entirety of the party. And I get hung up on, how is it possible that many people suddenly just became awful? Is it characterological, or did they change because circumstances changed them?
I think that there's both happening. Some people changed. I think that some people became radicalized. When I was writing the book, one of the things that shocked me, Mary, and this was like the thing that caught me the most off guard, was I was interviewing all people who you would have thought might have a conscience and do the right thing, right? I didn't go interview Stephen Miller, right? I don't think that Stephen Miller's that interesting, right? What is happening
evil.
Here. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I was trying to interview people who are human, who are three-dimensional, or complicated, people that have a shadow side and a good side and want and aspire to be good people. And they have just been convinced themselves. Some of them have been brainwashed by Fox and TV, and some of them, I think, that just leads to personal animus. They've convinced themselves that the really bad people out there are on the left. And they would rant people that were otherwise kind of gentle, good people. I'd start interviewing them and we get deeper and deeper. And, we'd be on backgrounds. They knew their name wouldn't be on it. And they'd start to get riled up. And they'd be like, in the Lincoln Project and MSM and the reporters that are all out to get us. And, we have to drink out of paper straws now. And I'm like, why are you so mad about this? You're a successful, privileged white senator or staffer or House member or consultant who's making money. Like, why? I don't understand why they're so upset. But I think that, some of that is we need to get a psychologist in there. Some of it is that they know that they're guilty. And so, you lash out at the other side. And some of it is, I think, just this personal, what's the word? Annoyance, animus, just like, they're so, it's like the liberals in their life bother them so much, the sanctimony, the perceived sanctimony, that they've been radicalized. And so I think that was the most surprising thing. People that I thought would be reasonable And I think that's what leads to things like, look, you even had retiring senators, even the supposedly good senators like Rob Portman, people who are supposed to know better, they didn't convict, right?
That's
Like they
right.
could, and when they had no political, he was retiring, right? Like, like that, you can't blame that on doing what your voters wanted. He had
Right.
an opportunity, and there were a handful that fit that bill.
Well, I guess there are a lot of boards he wants to sit on or something. And I
But
think that is part of it
wouldn't he
too.
have been more better suited? Couldn't the Fortune 50, like, wouldn't he have been welcomed as a hero, as the person that convicted Donald Trump? I don't know. Anyway, I don't know. That's what I would pitch people. I'm like, they'd be like, well, Tim,
Right.
you can't do this. You can't get away. I was like, are you sure? Have you tried? It might work out for you, actually. Look at Cassidy Hutchinson yesterday, or like.
That's right.
Don't you think her life is going to be a lot better now that she acted with integrity? And as long as she doesn't get killed by a crazy
Well, I was going to
MAGA,
say it might be a little
rocky in the
scary
short
for a
term.
while.
Yeah, but in the long term, don't you think she's going to feel
She'll be
better
able to
about her
live with
choices,
herself.
be happier, be able to live with
Exactly.
herself, be welcomed into? Aren't doors going to open for her? That option was available to so many people who just didn't take it.
And Tim, that's one of the other things about this strange phenomenon that I have difficulty wrapping my head around. As you said, there are people who probably would have been hailed as heroes if they had stepped up and convicted him, or voted against the Muslim ban, or voted against torturing children. But then there's the party as a whole. And I've written about this because I'm still trying to figure it out. There have been so many off-ramps. All they had to do after the 2020 election started with Mitch McConnell to say he lost, move on. And yet here we are.
Yeah, and that's the biggest off-ramp that I still, I guess I do understand. I was about to say I don't understand. I can't comprehend it. I do understand it. They could have convicted him and just moved on to Ron DeSantis. Right now, that wouldn't have brought people like me back to the party. Ron DeSantis is not in many bet. I mean, he's, I guess, marginally better because he doesn't have like the personal psychological issues, all of them at least, that the former president does. But at least they could have like slept at night, right, and like convicted him and said, this guy honestly tried to end our democracy, and it's so obvious. Let's convict him, move forward. And they could have still had their cake and eaten it too, right? Like, I don't think it was even that risky of a vote, right? And there were so many other and that opportunities available to all of them now. Right now, you could say, look, we cut a deal with the devil. We got Roe. We overturned Roe. Now let's move on to Ron DeSantis. That's still available, but they don't do it. And the best answer I can come to is that for almost all of these people, I think there's some that are ideologically motivated, and some that are, but for the vast majority, the thing that drives them is this grievance against the left and the liberals and us and the people that are calling them out. And so if your top priority in politics is winning the game and owning the libs, okay, then you can't admit that they were right about Donald Trump, right? So to move on to Ron DeSantis, you have to admit that Mary and Tim were actually right about Donald Trump. Like, we gotta, you know what I mean? There, at some level, you have to say we have to move on from this guy because he's insane, and they can't bring themselves to do that, right? Like, because that goes against the whole, fundamental reason why they made this bargain in the first place. So I think that it's a psychological weakness and an unwillingness to admit what is obvious. I think that is the reason they haven't taken these off ramps.
Yeah, and the vilifying of people on the left has been going on for a very long time. But I think the grievance has hit a high watermark, and that's because of Donald, because he's the most aggrieved person I've ever met in my life, and it's sort of it's sort of a character trait of elected Republicans now. You have to be aggrieved and angry all the time, and also you have to make sure that anything you do is to own the libs, even if it's going to destroy the lives of your constituents. So I want to ask you about the other kinds of shifts we've seen. The Supreme Court in the last 2 weeks has not quite totally, but come close to obliterating the Establishment Clause. They have expanded gun rights, even in states where we want gun safety laws on the books because, we're densely populated, like New York City. They have rendered women across the country second-class citizens. They've essentially divided the country about in half, because now we're this checkerboard. Some women have rights here, they don't have them in the state next to them. So, and there are many more examples that just exemplify this court's cruelty and complete lack of integrity. It seems that what we have here is the exact opposite of what a Republican would have wanted 10, 15, 20 years ago. That it's head spinning.
Yeah, and there's a lot there. And I think that, of course, when I was doing Republican campaigns, right, that there was, this notion that we don't want to legislate from the bench, right? We don't want activist judges. We don't want judges. Like, that was the whole line, right?
Yeah.
Well, here we are. I think it was we didn't want liberal activist judges, which, I think has been revealed, the revealed preference. And I think that there's this small c conservatism, this sense of, kind of Oakshottian conservatism, right? Which is we don't want to change societies dramatically, right? Like we want, there's this, it's like about prudence. This is like George H.W. Bush style conservatism, right? Like we want to be prudent, right? It's not, we want to protect things and preserve things. If we make changes, they should be small changes. And like, there's some, that is good for the societal, fabric, right?
Yeah.
I was always kind of drawn to that a little bit. And there is also benefit to radical change in certain times. Gay marriage was radical change that really benefited me, but I got that argument, right? That's all out the window, right? Like all that small c conservatism. They don't even pretend like that is a value that is held anymore. And I think that that's reflected in where this court has gone. And I think that's particularly true on the gun, the gun issue. And obviously you listed a bunch of them, but just as one example, right? With New York, this was like 150-year-old law. I'm going from memory now. It was like a really old law. Like it wasn't like a new law that got challenged. New York had this law that was a states' rights thing. It had been enshrined. It did not prevent people from having a weapon. It just created, barriers, reasonable restrictions. I think that was a really revealing, overturn, paired with Roe, where Roberts kind of offered this middle ground, right? Like Roberts offered this middle ground, which I'm sure, a lot of pro-choice folks would have still been really upset about and would have limited rights, of course. But the Roberts proposal, right, was this more what you would have thought Republicans would have been for in a bygone era.
And what's so really maddening about it too is that they used exactly opposite
rationales for the two.
I mean, it's incredible what they're going to get away with unless somebody starts playing hardball. So it is, and then of course there's the anti-intellectualism, the anti-science element, and I don't think I certainly haven't paid as close attention to politics as I have been in the last few years. But I don't remember where that started happening, especially since we have practically every Republican senator went to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, or Oxford.
Well, there was the old Buckley line, and there's always been an anti-elite strain within the party, right? There's the old William F. Buckley line about how I'd rather be ruled by the first 10 names in the phone book in the Harvard faculty. I'm getting that a little bit wrong, the Harvard faculty lounge, but saying I'd rather be ruled by a random common man than the Harvard faculty lounge. So like that this anti campus conservatism has been long and great. I mean, like it goes back to Dinesh, and I don't know if you know this, Dinesh and Laura Ingraham like are on Dartmouth campus and instigating, right? So this goes way so that but so what is new, I think, is this, and you can see how this happens, where, okay, well, if the Ivy Leaguers are bad, okay, and if it's the elites that are bad, then the media is out for bad, that means that the scientists might also be bad, right? Like all smart people might be bad, right? And so, you can see how this gets drug in. And And I just, it's been shocking. What has happened last year? I look at some of my friends still. I was like, we're anti-vaccine now. You don't believe that the Earth is warming. I mean, look, I do plenty. There's plenty of mea culpa in my book. And in 2008, what McCain did with Palin was obviously just a massive error. That said, John McCain ran in 2008 on a platform of he supported cap and trade. Like that was going to be his big thing if he had won. Like he wanted to work with the Democrats to do a cap and trade thing to deal with climate. That was only 14 years ago. That the Republican presidential candidate, was very serious about dealing with climate. So that part has unraveled quickly, and I think that it's been driven in large part by Fox and these sort of media outlets, and then Trump. That now the anti-elite part is so central that has to now apply not just to the Harvard faculty lounge, but to the scientists that are trying to save us from a deadly disease.
Yeah, that part is stunning to me because it's very similar to the gun issue. I was talking to Ruth Ben-Ghiat about this a while ago. The thing with COVID is that they are putting themselves, their children, their loved ones at risk. And she said, you can find the origin of that sort of devaluation of human life in the gun culture. And it's true. I mean, they're still willing to, their kids go to schools, they'll go to churches or Walmart or whatever. So they're all equally at risk and don't want to do anything about it. It's still, I mean, I do, as you said, I understand it, but I don't quite.
Yeah. My husband is from West Virginia, rural West Virginia. And so I went back there for a funeral, not COVID related funeral during the pandemic. And, but I just, the stories that I was hearing, it's a small town. This was really hard. It was a hard one for me to sink in, because I get it in the abstract, right? That I'm mad at the elites. I'm mad at, I don't trust this vaccine. I don't trust, Dr. Fauci. I get that in the abstract, but you're in this small town, and I'm it's been a little while, so I'm blanking out. I forget if it was the football coach or the baseball coach, but like a prominent high school sports coach, big family. It's the kind of town where everybody knows everybody. Had been anti-vax, this was after the vaccine, and died. And, I said to my husband's dad, who's my father-in-law, who's a doctor, I was like, was there a rush on vaccines after that? Like that had to have been a wake-up call to everybody. And he said, for 1 or 2 days. He's like, for 1 or 2 days, we had a few more people than we did usually. And then it went away. And like, that is the part for me that is just, I still can't really wrap my mind around. And I think it shows how powerful that propaganda is, and these rationalizations that I write about are, right? That even in the face of death, I put this just a quick aside that is related in the book. I write about Chris Christie. Donald almost killed Chris Christie. I mean, literally almost killed him by didn't tell him that he had COVID, gave it to him. Christie's obviously has some comorbidities, and Christie's in the hospital, says that Donald calls him and says, you're not going to blame this on me, are you? He doesn't call him to send him a suit, send him something. He calls him to be like, you're not going to blame this on me. Christie gets out of the hospital and then campaigns with him. I'm like, what? He killed you. He almost killed you. You were on death's door. But that just shows how these sorts of, how powerful it is.
Well, I think part of it on the individual level, just American citizens, I'm with you. I know people who had very terrifyingly bad cases of COVID, have long COVID now, still haven't been vaccinated, got COVID again. Oh my God, fine, just stay away from me. Because I can't, the selfishness, first of all, is kind of mind blowing, but the lack of concern about their own lives is really, and these are people who have children. It's just unbelievable. And I live in New York. You don't have to go to West Virginia. That was on Long Island. You don't have to go to West Virginia to find that kind of thing. But with people like Christie, it's just got to be raw power. And this is one of the things, especially as we go through these January 6th committee hearings, that I've never understood, but it's becoming even more of a mystery how anybody could be afraid of Donald, how anybody could look up to him or think that he's worth being loyal to. I know that is not the most important part of the hearings, but it does kind of make me question like what exactly we're dealing with. And the larger issue, and you mentioned Ron DeSantis, and I think that's a very important thing to bookmark. My deepest concern right now about the hearings isn't if Donald gets off the hook, or it's that the Republican Party and Republican Party leadership is going to use these hearings and the conclusions drawn to say, hey, it was the executive branch, it wasn't us. We're fine now. And I think that, Mitch McConnell on down are as responsible for this, if not more so. Are you worried about that?
Oh yeah, I'm not worried. At some level, so I know that some Democrats in my life don't like this. I do think that Donald is uniquely dangerous because he has just this shamelessness superpower that as much as I disagree, and what DeSantis has done on the don't say gay, we could go on and on about DeSantis, right. but it takes a specially kind of warped mind to be able to be like, I'm going to create this fake fraud, and then pretend like I believe it for years, and like keep it going, right? Most humans, even bad people, eventually like want to at least convince themselves that they're telling the truth. Like it's really hard, you have to be especially kind of warped to be able to be like, I know that this is not true. And I'm not only am I going to keep saying it, I'm going to convince millions of people that, right? It's just, so it's hard to imagine that somebody like DeSantis would do that. He has some other bad traits. So at some level, I would welcome them moving on, because I think it's kind of the difference between existentially bad and just kind of normal bad. And so I'm not that worried about that, but I don't think that they're going to. And I do agree, by the way, that with the question of, and I don't know if voters will hold them this way. And I think that's what I'm more worried about. I don't think voters are going to hold the senators responsible, but there's no doubt that the senators are maybe not as responsible as Trump, but almost as. The January 5th, I always go back to that Georgia runoff on January 5th with Loeffler and Perdue. Everyone endorsed Loeffler and Perdue. They were running on a promise to overturn the election. That was the night before January 6th. Had Mitch McConnell had, and you said earlier, they had plenty of off-ramps. They had an off-ramp after November. They could have said, don't come down to Georgia. You lost. Yep. We're running these campaigns as we're going to be a check on Joe Biden. Joe Biden's the president. That's what these campaigns are going to be based on. And we need a check on Joe Biden. We need Mitch McConnell in the Senate. They could have run that campaign, the runoff. They didn't. They ran on this fake fraud nonsense. And so that was very directly tied to what happened the next day. Directly tied.
Absolutely. Oh, I mean, the enormity of the things that contributed to January 6th is kind of extraordinary. And, it all seems to be fitting together quite nicely, which makes it worse in some ways. I just want to push back a little bit on DeSantis, because I think he's more dangerous. I don't think he's going to try to overthrow the United States government. But I don't think whether the Republican Party rejects Donald or doesn't, whether they move on or not, I don't think anything changes ideologically. And as we talked about earlier, this court is hastening the extremity of the social disruption. That's not even the best way to put it. They're basically destroying American democracy. But DeSantis, he's not visibly insane. Right. He's not crude, and as far as I know, he doesn't throw hamburgers against the wall, and he doesn't tackle Secret Service agents. But that doesn't mean that he won't be just as bad, because look, Donald wasn't responsible for any of his policies. He just did what he was told. And the difference is, I think, DeSantis is more ideological, or is ideological, because Donald's not at all. His ideology is, I'm the only important person on the planet, and he's the best. But that putting it in a neater package, a more presentable package, and the other thing that worries me is that it seems like the Republicans are setting up a situation in which this kind of coup wouldn't be necessary because of gerrymandering in the Electoral College and the Supreme Court. So don't we have something to be concerned about?
Yes. Yeah. Oh no, I'm not saying don't be concerned.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, I just think that DeSantis is bad in different ways and in ways that make me just normal concerned rather than existential concern. And just to let me explain, I really, this might sound like alarmism, but I just don't know that the democracy could survive a Trump victory over next time. Like I just don't know that it could. I think I couldn't imagine if he's on the ballot. It's hard to imagine either situation where there's not violence and afterwards. I think that it's a very, and if he gets back in, the idea of who would be around him the next time. Over. I mean, it's completely over. Yeah. So for me, it's just like that is a catastrophic scenario that we need to do everything we can possibly to prevent. DeSantis, is bad in different ways, right? I agree with you because he's presentable, he's more electable. Because I think he's better at putting his own people in there, he'd be more effective at doing some nefarious things. My old boss, Jeb, even kind of likes him, which just horrifies me and blows my mind away. But that shows there are a lot of Jebs out there. Jeb didn't vote for Trump, right? So there are a lot of people like that would vote for DeSantis. And so obviously, I find what he's done with the schools in Florida to just be absolutely unconscionable. His presentation, there's almost nothing I like about Ron DeSantis, right? And so that was all. I was just trying to draw a distinction between for me, I just think if you're calculating getting rid of moving Donald off the stage permanently is a net win, and then we can deal with the next problem later.
Yeah, although I'm worried about 2022 because I think if the Democrats lose the House, then that does inch us closer to losing democracy because the hearings will be about a laptop and Benghazi. Right. That's 24/7.
Yeah, I said on Twitter yesterday, I was like, keeping the people behind the House Judiciary Committee Twitter feed from having a subpoena power is as good a reason to vote for Democrats as any policy issue next year. I mean, these people are insane.
Those tweets yesterday were unhinged.
Yeah, and the idea that those people would have subpoena power, I mean, it's Jim like Jordan? The government wouldn't do anything. That's extreme. And this slate, by the way, the 2022 Republican slate, we've talked about all this, and a lot of times there's this desire to kind of dull, be like all Republicans are bad, right? Which I understand that mindset, but there are different gradations of bad. And the Republican candidates that are up this time make the Tea Party class from 2010, look like John McCain by comparison. I mean, like this class is of lunatics at the House level, at the Secretary of State level, at the Senate level. I just don't think that people appreciate just how radical the next batch of Republicans. And if there's a wave, like the types of Republicans that would hold office from Secretary of State all the way up to Senate, very alarming. The old men, we made fun of Rob Portman at the start, plenty to make fun of with Rob Portman, but the difference between Rob Portman and JD Vance is market. I mean, it's Rob, it's like normal bad, existential bad, right?
Yeah, and I don't ever want to alarm people for no reason, right. But right now the House is pretty much almost that already, and imagine 10 more Lauren Boeberts or Marjorie Taylor Greene,
which is what we're getting.
It's exactly what we're getting, and at that point it seems impossible. Well, I don't know. It seems difficult to see a path around that anytime in the near future.
Look at that gun deal, for example. it only got this was the most modest gun deal imaginable, right? Like, I mean, it barely did anything. Like, I was happy they did it. Good on Chris Murphy. God love him for being willing to sit down with these assholes and have meet. But like, it was barely anything, and only 14 Republicans in the whole House voted for it. And I don't remember off the top of my head. I think 6 of them are retiring. So it's like, there's just nobody that's even. You don't have to be that excited about the infrastructure and the gun bills to say, okay, this is what a normal government looks like. This is what we should do. We're fixing our roads and bridges. We're making modest reforms to gun reform after a mass shooting of children. That's at least, the bare minimum that a government should be doing. The Republicans that voted for that are all on the way out the door.
Yep. Yeah.
So the ones that are coming in won't even do the bare minimum, right? It's like, you don't have to praise Richard Burr and Rob Portman and whatever, these Upton and Michigan. You don't have to praise these guys for doing the bare minimum, but you can acknowledge that at least they did the bare minimum and they're about to be replaced by Lauren Boeberts. And that is a meaningful difference.
It even though they still vote badly most of the time, right. Somehow it does matter that there's at least some level of seriousness and sobriety and some lines that won't be crossed.
In an emergency situation, you're like, I know we can get these 7 guys to just pass this thing that we need to pass because something happened, right? Like those types of people are going away.
Yeah, Rob Portman is not going around calling Democrats pedophiles and groomers.
Right.
So we'll leave that up to Jim Jordan and
Ted Cruz
Matt Gaetz is who should be in prison, but that's another mystery. I, as somebody who understands the Republicans, I'm always fascinated by people who've had similar experiences. Because the difference between how Republicans fight and how Democrats fight, it must be demoralizing to you to see this party that has so much to offer, honestly, just not being able to punch its way out of a paper bag.
It is kind of, and it's hilarious, actually, almost in a sad way. I think I mentioned this in the book. I forget, I might hit the cutting room floor, but I was like, even this goes back before this time. So the Democratic dirty trickster, when I was coming up, was David Brock, who also used to be a former Republican, right? Like American Bridge, the guy that started the thing. So it's like, it goes all the way back to David Brock, up through all the Lincoln Project guys and me. And it is frustrating. And I don't get it sometimes. I don't know what the Democrats are doing right now in the Senate, for example. It's like, in my Republican brain, it's always like tactic, strategy, how can we wedge them on the other side, right? And the Democrats are, it's like coalition building, what's the right thing to do? There's a nice part about all of that, right? But I'm like, I was saying to someone just earlier today, a Democrat, I said, why can't the Democrats put up a bill tomorrow that codifies Griswold, or that gives all women who are raped the right to an abortion? Right. And make the Republicans vote against that, and then run ads on it and say all these Republicans just voted against a bill that would have protected women that were raped from from being able to have a choice over their body. And it's like, well, some of the groups might be bad if we do rape and we don't include this or that. And I get that. It's like, it might feel like we're going to get criticized for that, or we need to get all the stakeholders on board. I'm like, what are we doing here?
Fascinating, because from where I'm sitting, it seems to me that the biggest thing Democratic voters want is reassurance that the people they voted into office are fighting for them, not, trying to make common cause with fascists or get a coalition about something. I was speaking with Dahlia Lithwick, and she had exactly the same idea. They make them vote on one piece of this every single day. Pull it, you think it's totally cool for a 12-year-old girl who was raped by her father to be forced to give birth to that baby who is both her sister and her daughter. That make them vote.
This is what they did on the immigrants, really quick. That's what Republicans did. They'd find someone that was killed by an undocumented immigrant, and then they'd call a bill. They'd be like, let's have a bill and name it after her. You could do that, right? It's like, I think that many cases they wouldn't want the attention, but you could find somebody that's like, hey, I was raped, or I had this, I was underage and this happened to me, and you could name a bill after that, right? And say, we're just going to protect this one type of instance. Okay. Are you with us on that or no? And if for whatever reason there are 10 normal Republicans that day, then great. Then you made an incremental progress. And if they say no, then you run campaign ads, in all of these swing states saying that the Republicans opposed a law that would have protected a 12-year-old, right? I don't, to me, it's like a no-brainer. And the Democrats are doing the opposite. And I understand that, there are other considerations, but it is frustrating, I have to admit.
There are never any other considerations for Republicans. And I was sort of hoping that the hearings would boost them, right? Because what we're seeing unfold, besides it's absolutely astonishing, I'm just breathtaking, the venality, the criminality of what's being uncovered. We're also seeing that, the other side, many people on the other side were involved deeply in this effort. So, maybe we should be playing hardball with those people who asked for pardons. So, right? It just seems kind of strange.
You would think so. And Ron Johnson, prime example. Stuff comes out this week. That's a huge Senate race.
Yeah. So, about the hearing, I'm curious because there has been so much information, especially yesterday.
Yeah.
There was something very poignant and sad about yesterday's testimony and the whole hearing. What stood out to you? Because there was so much nuance to what, there were so many small moments that might have been missed. And I think, as typically happens, people focus on the plate being thrown against the wall and the lurching for the steering wheel. What were some of your takeaways?
Yeah. I mean, for starters, I think that it's unclear to me why Mark Meadows hasn't been indicted yet. Mark Meadows is refusing a subpoena. I thought the testimony about him, the chief of staff, was his assistant. So, obviously everybody's going to focus on the presidential stuff, but she testified. It was an astonishing testimony about her boss. This violence, this attack on the Capitol was happening, and he seemed to be just not care, completely detached. I thought that was, an astonishing behind the scenes look at what was happening as the Capitol was being overrun. Another thing that stands out is the guns. Obviously, they get rid of the magnetometer. This was some of the things that she testified to were secondhand. This was firsthand, testimony. They're not coming from me. They're not coming from me. So who cares? Let them through. And I think that is also particularly relevant because it speaks to the inaction then for the following hours. It shows. Premeditation, to a certain degree, right? It's like, I know that this is a violent group or potentially violent group, and for hours I'm going to do nothing as they come and find my vice president. So to me, and just Cassidy herself, of all the grown-ups in Washington, not that I don't want to diminish her or whatever, but she was 24. She's 24. Yeah. She had no business being in that position in the first place. And we have all these adults who take an oath to the public and to the Constitution who are doing nothing or who are complicit. And they've left this 24-year-old, or now 26, to have to take all this heat. It just revealed once again just how astonishingly cowardly all the men around Donald Trump were.
And misogynistic. Like, seriously, you don't. Who was it? The head of Secret Service, or no, it was Ornato, saying, Cassidy, make sure he doesn't go. What is she gonna do? Yeah. Like, block the door? I mean,
this is who we're left with? A 25-year-old?
After person, right? Think about that. Yeah. Think about if she hadn't been there, and it's the same kind of narrative that if you think about one thing changing, if Donald had gotten to go to the Capitol. And the reason, I think sort of speculation in some ways is useless, but on the other hand, it is very important for people to grasp just how close we came and how much worse it could have been were it not for a 24-year-old woman surrounded by men twice her age.
Yeah. Who again, were in positions of responsibility, like responsibility to the country and public service, not just to one man. And that's the whole thing that just gets lost in all this. No, I mean, where is his national security? All these people, there are all these like people who say that they went in because we needed good ones in there. I knew that he was a little unstable, but I needed to. Where are all those people? Where is everybody? Like, they're all. Everyone is out. Everyone is MIA. It's just.
And that is, yeah. But I think that's a good point to focus on, because nobody said anything afterwards, even after they found out. And it's just like, and again, a lot of people who voted not to convict knew all of this as well. So it's fascinating in an exhausting way, I have to say. Although do you get the sense that the hearings are going, whether they move the needle or not, I guess we can't tell, but right now, but do you think that they are accomplishing anything groundbreaking and necessary?
Well, I think that obviously it was historically necessary to do it. So that was the minimum, and they're achieving that. And I think they've done a nice job. It could have been a nothing burger, and it hasn't been. So, so that's something. After that, it's going to be up to DOJ. I don't have a lot of hope that a former president's going to get indicted, but Rudy, Eastman, Clark, Meadows, it'd be nice to see somebody have some accountability. And I was talking to Bill Kristol about this. And he's like, it did make a difference, actually, that some people around Nixon went to jail, right? Because, it didn't obviously make everybody perfect and, ethical forever. But there was a period of time in Washington, he said, I'd be in rooms and people would be like, I don't want to be like, who so-and-so, who's in the, I don't want to be like Liddy, who's in the clink for a couple of years, right? And so there's some an accountability element to that. I think that the committee's made a really strong case. Those gentlemen that I named in particular, should face some legal action. And I reject the notion. I think people like judge it politically on like, will this save the House for the Democrats? No, right?
It's not the point.
Okay, that's not the point in the first place. But you can also have a political impact without having the ultimate impact, right? Could it help on the margins? Yeah. I think that, Sarah Longwell, my colleague at the Bulwark, does these focus groups. She said that in the focus groups of Republican voters, there's been a little bit more, towards Trump than usual over the last 2 weeks, right? I mean, they're still with him, but, she's seen a noticeable difference. And that's not nothing, right? So even a change on the margins, I think is a nice ancillary benefit of these hearings, if it's not the point.
I think that's really important. And it's educating people in a way they would not have been educated. I think so. There's just things about how the government works that people don't know because we don't teach civics anymore. So how could that? I just looked at the clock and I have taken up so much of your time, but I seriously could talk to you forever. It's been so great to meet you and to hear your take. I've seen your commentary. I've read your articles. I cannot wait to read your new book, Why We Did It, which it's on the bestseller list in Amazon or not quite yet?
Yeah, we're on, I think, I don't know. We're on top 25 on Amazon, I think. Somebody texted me earlier. So doing pretty good.
Phenomenal.
We'll see. List next week. And the same. It's so cool that we get to meet. I'd love to, a glass of rosé with you or something next time I'm through town. And
I love rosé.
We'll figure it out.
All right. Thank you so much, Tim Miller. This was fantastic. And hopefully we'll have you on again.
All right. Sounds great. Sorry I didn't wear my pearls. Next time.
All right. Okay. Cool. Thanks. Thank you so much to my guest, Tim Miller. That was incredible. His insights are really helpful I have so many blind spots when it comes to trying to understand the other side that it's always good to have somebody who's come over to our side, but share their understanding of how things work and how things have evolved or devolved the way they have. And thank you, of course, to all of you for listening. Just a reminder that anytime there is a January 6th Select Committee hearing, we will be live streaming in real-time commentary and analysis afterwards and a little bit before. So we'll keep you posted about those. Also on Tuesday, we'll have our strategy session up and running again. That's 7 o'clock Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. And that's at youtube.com/Politicon. And of course, next Thursday, we will have our regular show. Also at youtube.com/Politicon, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. And don't forget, while you're at YouTube, click on the bell, and that way you will be sure to find out anytime a new episode drops or a new video drops. And like Politicon, follow Politicon, like the episode, and of course you can listen in podcast form on Apple or anywhere else you listen. And that's it for tonight. Thank you again so much for being here. I will see you next Tuesday. In the meantime, be safe and take care. Bye.